Welcome to College Town,
a series where we explore the heart and soul of Southern football culture
across 5 iconic college football towns
in the powerhouse Toyota Tundra.
Football is everything here.
Go Dogs, baby.
You just see things that you wouldn't see anywhere else in the country.
We can be very loud when we're excited.
From Gainesville to Clemson, with stops in Athens, Tuscaloosa, and Chapel Hill, we'll uncover the rich traditions, passionate communities, and game day rituals that keep college football fans coming back for generations.
All these people come back to town, graduated 50, 60 years ago.
This city lives and dies with what their football team does on Saturdays.
It's really crazy to think about how dependent we are on kids playing a sport.
There's that small town feel that just erupts on game day.
Go Tigers!
I got it.
It's like you're at a carnival when you first see it.
Don't miss out. Watch every episode on SaturdayDownSouth.com/collegetown or click the link in our bio.
Now excited to be joined by a very special guest. It is Wes Blankenship. Wes, we got a ton to talk about. Obviously, it, of course, is Georgia-Bama week. We're going to get to that. But, man, we first have to talk about everything that you've been doing for SDS with this College Town project presented by Toyota. There has been a lot of stuff that has already come out. If you follow us on social, Saturday Down South on YouTube, follow us on Instagram, you can see all this content that's going to be coming out. But before we get into like the real nitty-gritty of it, traveling around 1,800 miles with a few Brits, a 21-year-old from Tallahassee, as someone that is Georgia, just as Southern through and through as it gets, how was that experience?
Yeah, Connor, thanks for having me on, and a huge shout out to Saturday Down South for tagging me to be a part of that project, man. I really appreciate it. It was amazing. It was a lot of fun, and everything you just mentioned is very true. We did have 3 British crew members, and we did have a recently graduated cinematographer from Florida State. So it was kind of a motley crew, to say the least. A lot of eye-opening experiences for all of us, really. It's funny because as different as the vernacular was between us and the British guys, I learned more from our 21-year-old photographer than I did from any of them. And I learned about what Gen Z's saying. I learned what bussin' means. I learned what no cap means. So it was a linguistic journey, no doubt. But it was a phenomenal crew. We all had a part to play, and not unlike any given football team in the Southeastern Conference or beyond. We did perform a little bit better than Florida State, thankfully. But it was a team effort, man, and it was great. Connor, Dan, Charlie, Josh, and myself, we put together some things that I think people are really going to enjoy, whether you're from the college towns we visited or not.
It's really awesome, and you kind of knew it was going to be awesome, the time and energy that was put into it. It's 5 college towns for the first season. We have you got to go to Athens, you got to go to Gainesville, Tuscaloosa, Chapel Hill, and Clemson. And I'm sure you had different takeaways from all those different places. Had you been to all those places before? Like what stood out, I guess, from the places that you hadn't been to yet?
Sure. Well, I live right outside of Athens, so I'm glad that one was in the mix. That was a quick up and down 316 couple of days for us, and that was amazing. And our visitors from across the pond enjoyed the classic city the most, so I'm glad to report that. For all my Bulldog fans out there, we converted a few English Bulldogs while they were here visiting. But as for the trips, the places that I visited that I hadn't been to before, I'd been to Chapel Hill, and I think if you've been to Athens and Chapel Hill, you can kind of see that they're similar, kind of old, historic Southern towns. Chapel Hill was a little sleepier, but the history there is amazing. And, a lot of people view it as a basketball school, but when I spoke with the people there, they were just as passionate about them some Heels football as well. I know the most recent result, James Madison notwithstanding, they love them some Heels football up there. I had not been to Tuscaloosa. I had not been to Gainesville. and I had driven through Clemson. So really eye-opening in a lot of different ways in a lot of different towns. As a Georgia grad, my experience with Florida was always in Jacksonville when Georgia and Florida played. So I'd never had an excuse to really stop by in Gainesville. And it is the hottest place I've ever been. It was very hot. It lives up to its name as the swamp. I think, if you're a Gator fan out there listening, though, you blew this dog away, because I really appreciated that they leave the football stadium open.
Always.
You can go visit Ben Hill Griffin and just check it out and sit in the stands. And even on a July morning, which is when we were there were people running up and down the stadium steps, sweating it out. I mean, I was really impressed with that. Tuscaloosa, the thing that struck me about Tuscaloosa is you can see how football has impacted that town economically. I mean, there's no doubt about it. The money that comes from the Nick Saban dynasty era is well spent. There are brand new stores everywhere. There are shops as far as the eye can see. It's really spread out. It's a large, large campus. And, I'm used to being a little bit more walkable when I'm downtown Athens, and T-Town was a little bit bigger than that. Clemson was fun, though. Clemson, if you've never been, I recommend it because it is right on the shores of Lake Hartwell. So there's a lot to do. It's kind of similar to Gainesville in its own way. You can tap into the nature, the natural aspect of what's right near campus. Gainesville, you're in the middle of what feels like a jungle. It's very beautiful with the ponds and wildlife. You will see a lot of gators. You will see a lot of big birds. I mean, you got to keep your head on a swivel in Gainesville because the wildlife is for real and is ferocious. But I really enjoyed so much of it. And the places that we got to visit, I think it showed me not only what their culture is like and what they're all about, but it shows you what sports means, and that those places would not be what they are if not for college athletics. And that's the whole point of the series that we did.
It really is. And getting to showcase that, it is something that I know I take for granted because I do this for a living. We talk about these places and these people, and we become so accustomed to driving through a college town and seeing a college bar or something like that. But when you experience it with people that are from overseas and they come here and they experience what it's like, even in July when it's not mid-season mode, which, you guys are doing this project in the summer when it's not necessarily like, hey, a peak college football Saturday, but even just seeing that, a sort of like lighter version of it, it kind of opens you up to, oh my God, like it really does all revolve around these places. And it's so unique. We wanted to showcase the Southern culture that's associated with this. So along those lines, and you knew you were going to be asked this question. I didn't prep you with this one, but it was going to come no matter what. The best bite of food you ate on those 5 trips was what?
Best food was in Tuscaloosa at a place called Archibald's Barbecue. And it's a little bit outside of Tuscaloosa proper. There are 2 locations, but Archibald's, you walk up and it has this old cinder block chimney, and it actually had caught on fire recently, and they had to rebuild the thing. But they did, and I'm glad that they did. And everyone there just has this family connection to it. They've worked there for generations. Their grandparents did. Their parents did. There was a 16-year-old kid there that I'm fairly confident will be the owner of it one day. But it was just tremendous, man. I mean, that's what makes barbecue elite, is when it has time to build up that residue of smoke and flavor throughout the years. And you can taste that at Archibald's. They hooked us up and gave us some huge dishes. I tweeted a photo. I'll make sure you get that. But they gave us some huge dishes, the ribs, the chicken wings, the okra, and then the sauce that they make. Of course, they wouldn't tell us what was in it, but that's for good reason. I mean, that's a good proprietary vat of sauce that they got going on there at Archibald's. So if you go follow your team to see a game in Tuscaloosa, go to Archibald's. That was the best food I had the whole time.
You're a Georgia grad. You've spent a ton of time in Athens, but getting to kind of experience it this way when you're coming in not so much as like a tourist, but like a connoisseur of the area and getting to experience different things and talk to different people. What was probably the biggest revelation for you, like going into Athens, even though you've probably seen every inch of Athens in a million different ways? Like what kind of stood out about that aspect of the trip?
I think it challenged me to look at it in a new way, and working with the guys that were not from the United States, that didn't necessarily know a ton about college football. I think each one of them had different, varying exposures to it. And, Dan knows a lot about it, but, even with Josh, our photographer from Tallahassee, it challenged me to look at it through their eyes and make sure I wasn't missing the things that make it great, and really tap into what is the heartbeat of Athens right now. And, I've lived through Athens. I went to school in the early 2000s here, mid 2000s, I guess. And I remember what it was like for Georgia to be hungry. I remember what it was like in those early Mark Richt days with David Green and David Pollock, to be a team that everyone knows about, but isn't knocking down the door just yet. And then you start to see incremental success. They win an SEC championship. They're still desperate, though. They're still hungry for a natty. And then Kirby comes. And it's just, similar to that layering of smoke that I mentioned at Archibald's barbecue in Athens. There is so much context, and there's so much history there of emotions and almosts and heartbreaks, and then finally breaking through and now being on the top. And yeah, Alabama still has Georgia's number for the time being. We'll see how it goes in Tuscaloosa this weekend. But it reminds me of those Florida years where you had everything but that win over Florida. Now Georgia has everything but. They went back to back. Should have been in the playoff last year. They've got it. They're right there within striking distance yet again, year in and year out. And it changes, I think, the people who are newcomers, the new students there that didn't live through that hurt. And that was kind of what opened my eyes to it, is how much Georgia's changed in some regards of expecting to be great. But then in other regards, the history of it that hasn't changed. The Georgia Theater, the legacy of widespread panic and REM, stories like Mama's Boy, which is where we went to get some breakfast and some brunch. And, they opened up years and years ago, now have multiple locations. So the thing that struck me, I mentioned seeing the economic impacts of Tuscaloosa, of the after, right? The after effect of Nick Saban. I think there's still very much a transitional during the phase of Georgia's dynasty, if you will, of how a lot of money from football, a lot more influx from students, very competitive school to get into. There's still a before and after. And I think Georgia still very much has those roots that Athens does, of where it's come from and where it's going is also evident.
You got to be on the road for a couple of weeks, and there's a break in between, but this, the trip that, everybody's been on road trips before, and there are various elements of a road trip that you kind of just want to be over, not necessarily being on the road anymore. Like, oh, we're going to be this place for 3 hours or this place for 4 hours. I know that by the end of it, there was a general consensus from the people that I talked to getting out of that Tundra for the last time. They're like, dang, I'm actually going to miss that car. I'm going to miss driving around in that thing. What was that whole experience like? Because it'd be a little bit different if you guys are all cramming into some small vehicle, and this trip just feels like everybody's on top of each other, and it's just like, gosh, get me out of this thing. But it didn't sound like it was that vibe at all.
Connor, the Tundra that they gave us was phenomenal. It was spacious, comfortable. The monitor that it had for like GPS and the Sirius XM radio and all that was in there. By the time I got back into my truck that I drive daily, I felt like I was looking through a pinhole. I mean, the comparison with that monitor, it was just mind-blowing, the technology in it. A 2024 Toyota Tundra, and we all had room to spread out, put all of our gear in there. We had a lot of camera equipment, audio equipment, our own personal bags. We were going 2-3 cities at a time with a break in between. So that's a lot of packing that you had to do. And it was special, man. Every time I'm out on the road now, I feel like I see one of those tundras.
They're everywhere.
Everything I see just reminds me of my crew, man. Brings a tear to my eye.
I know you guys had an awesome time. Like I said, all that coverage, if you don't want to miss it, we have a tab on SaturdayDownSouth.com with College Town. You can follow it along there, or Saturday Down South on YouTube. We're going to have those videos. Clemson is going to be coming out this Sunday. Gainesville is already out. Follow us on Instagram as well, Saturday Down South on Instagram. Lots and lots of great coverage. Even if you don't like, even if you have no desire to go to these places or anything like that, the coverage is just absolutely awesome. And these videos are so unbelievably well done. I was glad you got to be a part of this. All right, Wes, let's talk about the two of those college towns that you're going to be seeing in action this weekend. You are a dog. Let's talk about this from the Georgia perspective, man, because gosh, when Nick Saban announced that he's retiring, whether Georgia fans want to admit it or not, they know deep down in places they don't want to talk about, they thought to themselves, man, it's gone. It's gone. The boogeyman is gone. If Alabama comes out with a win this weekend, this feeling of angst, how prevalent will that be for Georgia fans if that's the end result in Tuscaloosa?
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned previously, living through the Steve Spurrier dominance of the 2000s and 90s, before that, it was very much a feeling of, we're not just losing to this team, we're losing to this guy. We're losing to him. He's the one that has our number. And then you thought you had a chance. And then what does Ron Zook do? I'm not comparing Kalen DeBoer to Ron Zook.
Better
but
not.
Florida breaks Georgia's heart in a pre-college football playoff era in 2002. Still very much a what if in Georgia football and Mark Richt's history. Things are a little bit different now, and I think Kalen DeBoer steps into a better situation. The floor is a lot higher, and I think he's a better coach. So if Georgia once again comes up short against Alabama, the thing that makes it hard is logging onto the internet for a lot of Georgia fans and having to face that. Whereas you should have the feeling of, well, yeah, Kirby's 1 and whatever against the Tide, but that
1-5, yeah.
That 1 was pretty dang special, right?
True.
But I think people have still had a hard time getting over that, and I get it. It is very frustrating. And I think that if Georgia doesn't win, the context of their season is not ruined, but the context of how you feel day in and day out walking around as a Georgia fan is just, well, dang, like I hope we get them again because I thought that was going to go a lot differently. But we'll see how that goes, Connor. I am cautiously optimistic, I'll say. And I think that Nick Saban no longer being there, I put that in air quotes, names on the field, and think he's still having his opportunities to help out as he sees fit. But Georgia's got the roster. They got the coaches. The only thing they don't have in this one, I think, is the home field advantage.
It's going to be so interesting to see how we see these year-to-year adjustments, because that SEC championship is still fresh on the minds of many on both sides, I think, in this one. But, you know, I go back and we'll see flashbacks of 2007, because, of course, that's the last time that Georgia won in Tuscaloosa, a game that at the time felt like, man, like Bama's just always going to be like this. And it's year one of the Saban era, and Stafford comes in there, and it's this big monumental win for Georgia. Do you remember that? Is that even a fair thing to bring up because of how many different iterations we've seen from Georgia since then?
Yeah, I do remember that. That was, I believe, the night of my senior high school homecoming, and we were watching it at dinner, and all of our dates were pissed because we were paying a lot more attention to that. The thing I remember about that game, though, is the call and Todd Blackledge just being just flummoxed that Mike, who's in the booth with him,
was it Mike Patrick? I think. Yeah, that was that game, wasn't it? Gosh, that's crazy. Man, that clip is so viral. It's so perfect 2000s material. I think 3-year Letterman tweeted that out. Like, this is the most 2000s moment in the history of the internet. It was perfect. That was that night. Gosh.
And I think people still are. It was Mike Patrick.
Yeah.
I think people still are wondering, what's Brittany done with her life? But since then, since that win, Alabama's done a lot with its life. And covering Georgia, as I had, covered them in local news for a while, covered them more in this digital podcast era as well, kind of on Georgia's beat. It's tough for Georgia fans to understand this, I think. But unless you're up close to it and covering it and trying to be as neutral as you can't come away from being on the wrong end of those thumpings without a level of respect, of admiration, even though there's heartbreak. You think about the 2012 SEC championship game. That in a lot of ways continued Alabama's dominance and put Georgia's chances on hold. Another what if? What if Georgia wins that game? What happens to Kirby Smart in his career? What happens to Mark Richt at Georgia? There's a lot, man. There are a lot of ways that Alabama's dominance just sent tidal waves through the course of college football history. And Georgia's been on the wrong end of it from Dogs fans' perspective many, many times. And this one is just another chance. Saban is gone. A lot of the players that he recruited are still there, though. And they got a dang good coach still. Time will tell if he's as dominant and as legendary. I don't know if a lot of people expect that many coaches will have the chance to be that dominant and legendary in the expanded playoff era and NIL era in which we live now. But this is a real one, man. And the thing for Georgia is it's just the beginning of that gauntlet. At Texas, at Ole Miss, Tennessee at home, and playing week in and week out in the SEC. Who knows who's going to sneak up on you? And I hear a lot of Georgia fans saying after that Kentucky game, well, Kirby's teams have this game once a year. You struggled against Auburn. Before that, you struggled at Missouri. But the thing that I'll say that is different walking into this Bama house of horrors is that you had already seen, and I'll point at 2022 specifically, you won the national championship that year. You'd already seen proof that your team could blow the doors off of everybody. You'd already seen proof when they destroyed Oregon. You'd already seen the proof when they went into Columbia and blew out South Carolina. Georgia's win against Clemson is looking better by the week, but they'd only done that one time. And what else have they shown you other than that? I don't know if you can just say, they struggled at Kentucky. It's just part of the season. They should still do well against everybody else. The schedule's a lot harder, and there's no guarantee that this team is made of the same stuff that 2022 team was.
What do Georgia fans think of Mike Bobo right now?
I mean, depends where you look, and it depends who you're hearing from. I mean, the vocal ones are always the ones that are least in touch with reality. And there's also some that give him the benefit of the doubt. Carson Beck didn't play very well at Kentucky. His offensive line didn't play very well. I mean, there were throws there to be made. And the same thing was true against Alabama in the SEC championship game. I'm not a Mike Bobo defender by any means. He's not proven that he's Todd Monken. But he's also not proven that he can't get the job done and that he can't put his players in the position to make the right calls, make the right plays. And in a lot of instances, they just didn't. I think Tate Ratledge going down in Kentucky was a little bit of a shock at the time. But I've also seen Georgia respond really well when offensive linemen go down in years past. They still recruit really, really well, Connor. They still have a lot of great depth. So Kirby Smart's pretty good off of a bye week, and they've had a lot of chances to look at what they did wrong and what they're not doing very well. And this is a chance for Carson Beck to lock in and prove that he's that first-round NFL draft pick that everyone says he is, and to earn some of that NIL money.
Trying to think of what I view as the best road win of the Kirby Smart era, because beating some of those Florida teams with Mullen. Obviously, that's a neutral site game. The Oregon game where they come out and they blow the doors off them in Atlanta, that's not a road game. Bama, they lose there in 2020. And I'm trying to not dismiss that, because I do think if you're going to be this juggernaut, this unstoppable force, that's a big part of it, right? Like going into somebody's house in the way that Bama did to Georgia, and the very infamous funeral game that kind of launched the Bama dynasty into what it became. I don't need to remind Georgia fans of that, but like, what do you view as that best road win that Kirby has had so far? Because I think that it's very much on the table on Saturday night if they're able to get it done in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, I mean, if they win in Tuscaloosa, this is number one, no doubt about it. But don't discount the games they've gone into Knoxville and won. I mean,
true.
Whether Tennessee's good, great, top 10 or not, they're loud when it kicks off, whether they're there in their seats in the second half or not, because Kirby's made them leave quite a few times. But last year was pretty impressive. Going into Auburn is similar, going in and winning there. But I think the signature is winning at Notre Dame in 2017.
That's a good point.
I think that in a lot of ways put Georgia on the trajectory that they're still on. But yeah, you beat Alabama this weekend in Tuscaloosa. That's number one. That's the best win that he will have had, no doubt about it, because not many teams go in there and get a win.
Even better than the national championship 21?
No. No. I was at that game. That's legacy mode. That game right there was special for a lot of reasons. And don't forget, man, it's this expanded playoff, the schedule that Georgia has, unless they drop 3 games in the regular season, which I don't think that they will, very good chance you'll see Alabama again. So just because you don't win this one, if you don't, and I'm not taking that off the table, but the season's not over. Might be hard to go to church on Sunday and sit next to your Bama buddy in the pew and go get lunch with them, and you might stay home that next day if it happens. But season's not over if you don't win this weekend.
Do you have Bama buddies that you do that with? That doesn't sound right.
What's that?
Do you have Bama buddies that you do that with? Because that doesn't sound right.
I don't have any Bama buddies this week.
That's the correct answer. You got a prediction for Saturday night?
Yeah, I think Georgia's getting a lot of smoke that isn't necessarily fair, just based off of one game. Because what did Alabama do the week before that at home against South Florida? I think it's a much more evenly matched game than the optimistic Bama fans want to think, and I think the pessimistic Georgia fans that have way too much Larry Munson in them aren't giving them enough credit. Georgia's got a long season ahead. I don't think they drop this one. They might drop one down the road, but I think Georgia does find a way to get a win. I think Kirby Smart welcomes Kalen DeBoer to the Georgia-Alabama rivalry. It is not a traditional rivalry in a lot of historical college football perspectives, but I think it is in modern day college football. It's not the last time they'll match up. It'll be a dang good one. I think Georgia wins it. I'll say 27-24.
I like that. I like that a lot. Last one for you, and I'm not going to put you on the spot with an invitation, question, requests, however you want to call it. But the Matthew McConaughey video for that Georgia-Texas game, when should we expect that to come out? That's like a Monday video for you, right?
We'll see. We'll see what the storylines are that week. Just depends how the spirit leads, Connor. You never know what's going to happen between these old ears. You know what I mean?
I'll bet a whole lot of money that the spirit's going to lead you to some McConaughey that week. He's been pretty relatively reserved this year, which I kind of like. I feel like he's almost dialed it back a little bit, but him retweeting you ahead of the Georgia Texas game, like I'm banking on that. That's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to meet him. I'd love to do an impression to his face. He's shared some of my stuff before, so I don't think it bothers him. I think it's a badge of honor for him. No doubt about it. And now that Texas is in the SEC in our neck of the woods, it only makes too much sense for it to happen one of these days. We'll see.
Love it. Like I said, College Town awesome stuff coming down the pipeline. I'm sure you're going to have it all over your socials as well. SDS socials will be tweeting out clips and these full videos. Everybody should go check this stuff out. It is absolutely awesome. I was so glad that you got to be a part of this and do this. Really appreciate the time, and I'm sure we'll catch up soon, man.
Yep. Go watch College Town. It's awesome. Thanks, Connor.
Thanks, man.